Alright, Part 381, Waivers Exemption Pilot Program. 381-100, what is the purpose of the part? 381-105, what is required to comply with the rules in this part? 381-110, what is the definition applicable to this part? So Part B, procedure for requesting waivers. What is a waiver? How do I determine when I request a waiver? 210, how do I request a waiver? 32015, what do the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration do after the agent receives my request for a waiver? 3220, how long will it take the agency to respond to my request of a waiver? 225, why should I contact and have a question about, who should I contact with a question about information with a required submit the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration about the status of my request of the waiver? So Part C, procedure applying exemption. What is an exemption? 300. 305, how do we determine whether I apply with the exemption? 310, how do we apply with the exemption? 315, what does the Federal Motor Carrier Safety do after the agency receives my application for exemption? 317, may I resubmit the application for the exemption if it is denied? 320, how long will it take for the agency to respond with the application for the exemption? 325, what should I contact with the question about with the information I required to submit the Federal Motor Carrier Safety about the status of my application exemption? 330, what are required to do if the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration my application for an exemption? So Part D, initiation of pilot programs. 400, what is a pilot program? 405, determines whether the pilot program should be initiated. 410, what do I have no idea of the suggestion for pilot program? 415, what should I contact with a question about the information to include with my suggestion? What will the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration do after the agency receives suggestion of the pilot program? So Part E, Administrative Procedure Pilot Program. 500, what are the general requirements for the agency must satisfy to conduct the pilot program? 505, what are the minimum elements required for the pilot program? 510, what are the Federal Motor Carrier Safety and the pilot program before its scheduled completion date? 515, will the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration remove approved participants from the pilot program? And 520, what will the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration do with the result of the pilot program? Subpart F, preemption, state rules of 381, 600, do waivers, exemption, pilot programs, preempt state laws and regulations. Alright, Subpart A, General, 381, 100. What is the purpose of this part? The purpose of the rules procedure requesting waivers applying with the exemption of those provisions of Federal Motor Carrier Safety regulations which are issued in the authority of Title 49 U.S. Stand Code 311 36, Chapter 313, and the Initiation Administration Pilot Programs. 381, 105. What is required to comply with the rules in the part? You must comply with these rules in part with the going with the request of the waiver, apply with the exemption. You should follow the instructions. Subpart D, but this part you would likely to recommend the agency initiate pilot program. 380. 110. The definition applicable to the part of the commercial motor vehicle needs aim for the motor vehicle to meet the definition of the commercial motor vehicle found in Title 49 CFR 382 107. The current concerning controlled substance alcohol use testing Title 49 CFR 383.5 concerning with the commercial driver's license Title 49 390 concerning with the parts of 390 through 399 for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration for the Administrator means for the Chief Executive of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and agency with the Department of Transportation Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations of the Title 40 CFR Parts 382, 383, 390, 19, 390, 21, and Parts 391, 393, 395, 396, 399. He means individual motor carrier with and if as well with the responsible operation of the commercial motor vehicle with the term include the motor carrier agency, the office of representative as well with employee reasonable hire, so supervising, training, assessing, dispatching driver with employees concerned with the installation, inspection, maintenance of the motor vehicle equipment and all other accessories. You also include the interested parties who would like to suggest the recommended with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and the pilot program. So Part B, procedures requesting waiver. What is a waiver? The waiver to temporary regulatory relief for the one or more Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration regulations given to a person subject to the regulation with the person who intended to engage in an activity that would be subject to the regulation. A waiver to provide for the person with a relief of the regulation up to 3 months. A waiver is intended for the unique non-emergency events subject to the conditions imposed. The administrative waiver may only be granted for the one or more requirements contained with the following parts of the section Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Part 382, Controlled Substance Alcohol Use Testing. 383, Commercial Driver License Standard Requirements Penalty. 390, 19, Motor Carrier Identification Report, Marking of the Commercial Motor Vehicle. 390, 21, 391, Qualification of Drivers. 392, Driving Commercial Vehicle. 393, Parts of Accessories Necessary for Safe Operation. Part 395, Hours of Service as Drivers. Part 396, Inspection, Repair, and Maintenance. And Part 399, Step Handhold and Dock Requirements. Alright, 381, how do you determine when I may request a waiver? The may request a waiver if one with a favor motor carrier safety administration would you using operating the commercial motor vehicles make it unreasonable difficult to do so during a unique and non-emergency event that will take no more than 3 months to complete. Before you decide to request for the waiver, you should carefully review the regulation, determine whether the REU or in particular alternatives already available that would allow the use of the operating commercial motor vehicle during the event. You also should determine whether you need a waiver for all the requirements in one or more parts of the regulation, whether one or more limited waiver certain sections within one or more parts of the regulation will provide acceptable level of regulatory relief. For example, if you need relief for the one or more record-keeping requirements of concern driver's qualification, you should not request relief for all of the requirements of Part 391. 381, 210. How do I request a waiver? You must send a written request, for example, the type of the handwritten printed letter, which includes all of the information required with this section of the Administrative Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, 1200 New Jersey Avenue, Southeast Washington, D.C. Must identify the person who would be covered by the waiver. The application of the waiver must include the name, the job title, mailing address, date, time, telephone number, the name of the individual motor carrier, the other entity that would be reasonable for the use of the operation commercial motor vehicle during the unique non-emergency event, principal place of the business for the motor carrier, other entity, the street and address and city and state and zip code, and the U.S. identification number of the motor carrier if applicable. You must provide a written statement that describes the unique and non-emergency event of the waiver that would be used, including the time period during which the waiver is needed, identify the regulation that you believe is needed to be waived, provide the estimate of the total number of driver of the commercial motor vehicles that would be operated under the terms and the condition of the waiver, explain how they would ensure that they could achieve the level of safety equivalent greater than level of safety that would obtain complying with the regulations. Alright, 381, 215. Will the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration do after the agency receive the request for the waiver? Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration review over the request, make the recommendation and final the administrative final decision with a grant or deny the application waiver that will be made with the administrator. After the decision signed with the administrator, you will be signed a copy of the documentation included with the term of the condition waiver, reason denying application for the waiver. 381, 220. How long will it take for the agency to respond to my request? You should receive the response of the agent within 60 calendar days of the administrator receive the request. However, depending on the complexity of the issue that is discussed in your application, the availability staff of the review to the material final discussion make up to 120 days. 381, 225. Why should I contact the questions? Who should I contact if I have questions about the information I require to submit to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety about the status of the request for the waiver? You should contact the Federal Motor Safety Administration Office of Bus and Truck Standards. Operations, 1200 New Jersey Avenue, Southeast Washington, D.C. Subpart C, procedure applying for exemption. 381, 300, what is exemption? Exemption, the temporary regulatory relief from the one or more federal motor carrier safety regulation given the person class of the employer person subject to regulation who are intended to engage in an activity that would make them subject to the regulation. Exemption provided the person class person of the relief from the regulation up to 5 years and may renew upon request for subsequent 5-year periods. Exemption may only be granted if one or more of the requirements contained in the following parts of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Part 382, Controlled Substance Alcohol Use and Testing, 388.3, Commercial Driver License Standard Requirements and Penalties, 391, Qualification of Driver, 392, Driving the Commercial Motor Vehicle, 393, Parts of accessories necessary for the safe operation, 395 hours to serve the drivers, and 396, Inspection, Repair, and Maintenance, 399, Set Pay and Hold and DAC requirements. Alright, 381, 305. How do I determine when they may apply for exemption? You may apply with the exemption with one more federal motor carrier if it prevents the implementation for a more efficient, effective operation that would maintain a level of safety equivalent to or greater than the level achieved without the exemption. Before you decide to apply for the exemption, you should carefully review the regulation and determine whether there are any practical alternatives already available that would allow the motor carrier operation. You should also determine whether you need the exemption from the other requirements, one or more of the parts of the regulation, whether the not more limited exemption for a certain section, one or more parts of the regulation would provide an acceptable level of regulatory relief. For example, if you need regulatory relief for one of the record-keeping requirements concerning the driver qualifications, you should not request regulatory relief from all of the requirements of the 391. 381, 310. How do I apply with exemption? You must send the written request, for example, the type of handwritten printed letter. It includes all of the information required by the section Administrative Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, 1200 New Jersey and Southeast Washington, D.C. You must identify the person or the persons who would cover the exemption. Application for the exemption must include your name, job title, mailing address, date, time, telephone number, and the name of the individual motor carrier that would be responsible for the use of the operation of the commercial motor vehicles. Principal place of business, the motor carrier, street address, city of the state, the zip code, U.S. identification number of the motor carrier. You must provide a written statement that describes the reason exemption needed, include the time of the period during that is needed, identify the regulation from where would you like to be exempted, provide as estimate of the total number of the driver of the commercial motor vehicle that would be operated under the terms of the condition of the exemption, assess the safety impacts of the exemption may have, to explain how you would ensure that you could achieve the level of safety equivalent or greater than the level of safety that would be obtained by complying with the regulations, describe the impact and inability to test, innovate, and safety management control systems, etc. You should experience this exemption not granted is an exemption not granted by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Your application must be included with a copy of all the research report, technical papers, public documentation, or reference. Alright, 381-315. What will the Federal Motor Carrier Safety do after the agent receives my application? The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration review the application and prepare for the administrator with the signature of the Federal Register of the most notice requesting public notice of the public comment with your application for the exemption. With the notice will give the public an opportunity to review the request, your safety assessment, analysis required in 381, 310, any other relevant information known to the agency. After review of the comments received in response, Federal Register notice described in paragraph of the section, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration will make recommendations to the administrator that either the grant or deny the exemption notice of the administrative decision will be published in the Federal Register. See, when the exemption is granted, notice will be identified with the provision Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulation, which will be exempt with the effect of the date period, all the terms and conditions of the exemption. If the exemption is denied, the notice will explain the reason for the denial. A copy of your application for an exemption, all comments received in response to the Federal Register notice shall include with the public document available for review and interested parties. Interested parties may view the information contained in the docket visiting the Department of Transportation Docket Management Facility, 1200 New Jersey Avenue, Southeast Washington, Jersey, 20590. All information in the exemption document will be available. The exemption address for 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, except for the federal holidays. Internet use can also access information received at the Department of Transportation Docket Management Facility using federal document management system using a uniform resource locator is available 24 hours each day, 365 days a year, following the main instructions online for more information for help. 381, 317, may I resubmit the application for the exemption if denied? If the administrator denies your application for the exemption, you can reasonably address the reason for the denial. You may resubmit your application following the procedure in 381, 310. 381, 320, how long will it take the agency to respond to my application for the exemption? Agency will attempt to issue the final decision within 180 days to receive the application. However, if you leave without the important details of other information necessary for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to prepare a meaningful request for the public comment, if the agency will attempt to issue the final decision within 180 days of the date it received additional information. 381, 325, why should I contact you? I have questions for the information I'm required to submit with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration about the status of my application exemption. You should contact the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration Office of Bus Truck Standards of Cooperation, 1200 New Jersey Avenue, Southeast Washington, D.C. 20590. 381, 330. What am I required to do? Federal Motor Carrier Safety grants of my application for exemption must comply with all the terms and conditions of the exemption. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration immediately revoke the exemption if you fail to comply with the terms and conditions of the exemption. Exemption resulted in lower levels of safety able to maintain before exemption was granted. And continuation of the exemption is determined by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety inconsistent with the goals and objectives of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety regulations. Alright, 7D, Subpart D, initiating pilot programs. We're going to cut the tape there.